D. Lemon, right now.
How you feeling?
Better than I deserve.
You feel better today?
I'm getting there.
Yeah.
I had to come in for this. This mattered.
Yeah, it did matter. And, you know, you were talking about this bond proffer. I mean, Chris.
I don't know how his lawyers read that and were okay putting out the statement that he had them put out. I don't know where they get off saying that the police are doing some disservice to Smolet. Unless this is the biggest fabrication, not just in Chicago, but in the nation's history of policing, this guy's got big problems.
The department has a long history of doing some things right, but a lot of things wrong. This case is so high profile. There appears to be from this so much evidence that it's hard to see how this would indeed be a setup. And I'm going to explain why. Again, you have to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. There is a justice system, a legal system in our country. But when you look at this, it just floors you.
Look, I mean, if you just start with the basic idea of two Nigerian brothers putting on MAGA hats and beating the guy up, that was always a little far-fetched.
Well, it wasn't MAGA hats. He never said MAGA hats. He
right,
said
but that
MAGA
was the implication, right? And they said MAGA country.
Well, white guys.
You know, so look, unless
a lot of coincidences.
Unless I can't even qualify. To be honest, look, if I wind up being wrong on this, I'm wrong. But I've never read a more damning proffer on something than this is. So, look, if he made it up, he's going to have to justify it. DL had good advice for him. You know, if you screwed up and did this, own it. You want to say why you did it this way? Do that. But you're not helping the cause. I'll tell you that right now. There's a lot of truth that's going to get covered up by one untruth.
I'm similar to DL. I say if it is true, confess, throw yourself on the mercy of the court and of the people, and then see where that leads you. Thank you, Chris. Feel better, my friend.
Listen, I want to hear your opening.
Okay, I'm going to do it now. I'll see you tomorrow, but I want you to feel better. Okay, so here we go. We're going to talk a little bit more about this. This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to talk more now about Jussie Smollett tonight. Free on bail after his appearance last month, an attack that he claimed included racist and homophobic slurs and a noose around his neck. Police say the whole thing was a hoax. But a statement released tonight on behalf of the Empire actor says, in part, Mr. Smollett is a young man of impeccable character and integrity who fiercely and solemnly maintains his innocence and feels betrayed by a system that apparently wants to skip due process and proceed directly to sentencing. As I said last night, innocent until proven guilty. Innocent until proven guilty. It bears repeating. Jussie Smollett has not been proven guilty. That is true. He has not been proven guilty. He's just as entitled to the presumption of innocence as anyone else. But there is no disputing this fact. And it is a fact. This whole sordid story takes attention away from real victims. It takes attention away from people who have suffered, people who have died from gun violence in Chicago. As a police superintendent, Eddie Johnson, he said it best today, right at the beginning of his press conference.
Good morning, everyone. Before I get started on why we're here, you know, as I look out into the crowd, I just wish that the families of gun violence in this city got this much attention, because that's who really deserves the amount of attention that we're giving to this particular incident.
Mr. Superintendent, you are exactly right. The families whose children, whose parents, whose brothers, sisters, whose nearest and dearest have been taken away from them by gun violence, they deserve attention. Chicago Sun-Times reports 2,948 people were shot in Chicago last year. 19-year-old Delmonte Johnson was part of a group working to stop gun violence in the city called Good Kids, Mad City. It formed in the wake of the Parkland shooting. And then last September, Delmonte was shot to death as he walked along a South Side street. 17-year-old Janae Patterson dreamed of being a nurse after graduation. She was shot to death at a block party in August. And 88-year-old Valoria Taylor was shot to death in October in her apartment in an apparent domestic-related shooting. And on and on and on and on. And there are more victims in all of this. If things played out the way the police say, if Jussie Smolet actually concocted a fake attack because he was dissatisfied with his Empire salary, then that is disgraceful, to say the least. It's disgraceful for anybody, especially a person of color, to exploit one of the vilest, racist symbols in our history for personal gain. Superintendent Eddie Johnson.
So this morning, I come to you not only as the superintendent of the Chicago Police Department, but also as a black man who spent his entire life living in the city of Chicago. I know the racial divide that exists here. I know how hard it's been for our city and our nation to come together. And I also know the disparities, and I know the history. This announcement today recognizes that Empire actor Jussie Smolet took advantage of the pain and anger of racism to promote his career. I'm left hanging my head and asking why. Why would anyone, especially an African-American man, use the symbolism of a noose to make false accusations? How could someone look at the hatred and suffering associated with that symbol and see an opportunity to manipulate that symbol to further his own public profile? How can an individual who's been embraced by the city of Chicago turn around and slap everyone in this city in the face by making these false claims?
The Superintendent Johnson didn't even try to hide his disgust. He was right that exploiting racism is shameful. There's no excuse for it. And you could hear the superintendent's outrage in his voice. And I have to be honest, his tone really took me back. I can imagine my dad and my uncle or grandpa chastising me if I'd done something really terrible or stupid. Boy, what's wrong with you? What is wrong with you? Why the hell would you do something like that? Telling me not only was what I did wrong, son, boy, what are you doing? This is reprehensible. And you need to think about your actions. And this whole story hurts the LGBT community, too.
Chicago hosts one of the largest pride parades in the world, and we're proud of that as a police department and also as a city. We do not, nor will we ever tolerate hate in our city, whether that hate is based on an individual's sexual orientation, race, or anything else. So I'm offended by what's happened, and I'm also angry. I love the city of Chicago and the Chicago Police Department, warts and all. But this publicity stunt was a scar that Chicago didn't earn and certainly didn't deserve.
I actually think my dad would have said, "Have you lost your damn mind?" For LGBT people to be dragged through the mud for the sake of a publicity stunt, if it's truly what it was, well, the superintendent is right. Nobody deserves that. And remember, this is an America where hate groups, hate crimes are on the rise. And you've got to wonder, the next time there's a hate crime, and we all know there will be a next time, will people believe the victims?
Our city has problems. We know that. We have problems that have affected people from all walks of life, and we know that. But to put the national spotlight on Chicago for something that is both egregious and untrue is simply shameful. I'm also concerned about what this means moving forward for hate crimes. Now, of course, the Chicago Police Department will continue to investigate all reports of these types of incidents with the same amount of vigor that we did with this one. But my concern is that hate crimes will now publicly be met with a level of skepticism that previously didn't happen.
Men, women, people of color, LGBT people have suffered and died as a result of hate crimes that were all too real. And America can't afford to go backward. to disrespect those victims because of this single case. Now, we all know that hate crimes are real, racism is real, and we all know the Chicago Police Department has its own troubling history of abuse. After all, it was just last month that Jason Van Dyke, a white former Chicago police officer, was sentenced to more than 6 years in prison for second-degree murder in the 2014 killing of Laquan McDonald, a black teenager. We can't afford to close our eyes to that. But what we heard from Eddie Johnson today could be a way forward.
I'll continue to pray for this troubled young man who resorted to both drastic and illegal tactics to gain attention. I'll also continue to pray for our city, asking that we can move forward from this and begin to heal.
So I just have a word for people who I see on TV just spinning and twisting themselves in pretzels, trying to figure out a way, like, how do I do this? A word, please, to the folks who are saying, well, we all know the Chicago police can't be trusted. This is a setup. Just stop it. I want you to stop and think about it this way, okay? Let's just stop and think about it this way. The police did not pull Smolet over in traffic. They didn't stop and frisk him. They were called in for his defense. What reason would they have to set him up? He brought the police to him, not the other way around. So tonight, Jussie Smolet is defiant. The Empire actor says his right to be presumed innocent was trampled on today. Yes, Smolet is right, that you're innocent until proven guilty in this country. And while Jussie Smolet was given the benefit of the doubt for weeks, some question whether the Chicago Police Department was telling us everything. Critics suggested there were unanswered questions or they were hiding things. Well, today the Chicago PD answered all the questions, all of them. They did their job. Through surveillance, today, prosecutor Risa Lanier of the Cook County State Attorney's Office laid out step by step how Jussie Smolet allegedly staged a racial and homophobic attack against himself. She started on January 22nd when Smolet received a letter at the studio where the Empire television show is filmed.
This letter contained written threats directed towards defendant Smolet and contained a then unknown white powdery substance. The letter also contained cutout letters pieced together which stated, Smolet Jussie, you will die, Black F, and the word MAGA was handwritten on the envelope where the return address typically is located. This powdery substance has since been determined to be crushed ibuprofen tablets. The letter also contained a drawing of a stick figure, which appears to have a rope around the neck and a gun pointed towards it.
Well, the letter was turned over to the FBI for forensic analysis. Prosecutors say that after the letter was sent, Smolet reached out to a man named Abel. They knew each other from the Empire set. They worked out together. And prosecutors allege text messages show Smolet even bought drugs from Abel. At the end of January, Smolet asked Abel if they could meet.
Defendant Smolet texted Abel stating, might need your help on the low. You around to meet up to talk face to face? Smolet indicated to Abel his displeasure that the Empire Studios handling of the racist and homophobic letter he received 3 days prior. Defendant Smolet then stated that he wanted to stage an attack where Abel would appear to batter him. Defendant Smolet also suggested that Abel's older brother Ola assist him with the attack. Smolet stated that he wanted them to appear to attack him on the evening of January 28, 2019, near his apartment building in Streeterville. Defendant Smolet also stated he wanted the brothers to catch his attention by calling him an Empire F, Empire N. Defendant Smolet further detailed that he wanted Abel to attack him, but not hurt him too badly, and to give him a chance to appear to fight back. Defendant Smolet also included that he wanted Ola to place a rope around his neck, pour gasoline on him, and yell, "This is MAGA country."
Prosecutors say Smolet met with Abel and Ola on January 27th to show them the scene where he wanted the staged attack to take place.
Smolet directed the brothers' attention towards a surveillance camera on the corner, which he believed would capture the incident. There was a change in the plan in that bleach was going to be used instead of gasoline during the simulated attack. Smolet then drove the brothers home and provided them with a $3,500 personal check made payable to Abel, which was backdated to January 23rd of 2019.
Lanier adds Smolet gave the brothers $100. The staged attack took place on January 29th, just after 2 a.m. According to prosecutors, a witness was around her at that time.
This witness indicated that she heard nothing at the time of the staged attack, despite the fact that defendant Smolet told CPD detectives that his attackers were yelling racial and homophobic slurs at him, and he in turn was yelling back at them.
There you have it. Chicago officials went into incredible detail, laying out their investigative work. They answered the questions. Now it is Jussie Smollett's turn to answer questions. Yes, everyone is innocent until proven guilty in this country. But now we have the facts from the investigators. And what Jussie Smollett has said so far doesn't match those facts. So he has some explaining to do. How will he defend himself? Will he be successful? Ariva Martin, Mark O'Mara will dig in next.
This is CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Jussie Smollett is defiant tonight after posting bail and being charged with a felony for filing a false police report. Mark O'Mara is here to discuss. So is Ariva Martin, the author of Make It Rain. Good evening to both of you. Mark, I'm going to start with you. For CNN received this statement on behalf of Smollett. It says, today we witnessed an organized law enforcement spectacle that has no place in the American legal system. The presumption of innocence, a bedrock in the search for justice, was trampled upon at the expense of Mr. Smollett, and notably on the eve of a mayoral election. Mr. Smollett is a young man of impeccable character and integrity who fiercely and solemnly maintains his innocence and feels betrayed by a system that apparently wants to skip due process and proceed directly to sentencing. What's your reaction?
Well, like I said before, if he did what is alleged to have been done, that he set back the civil rights movement a decade or more because of the way he sort of misused it. But we are far from that. So he is presumed innocent, and that presumption of innocence never goes away until a jury, when they hear all the facts, and we haven't heard any facts yet, quite honestly, and they apply the law properly and apply it to the proper standard, then the presumption goes away. And here's why it's important. What I heard today from that prosecutor, after the charges were done, after he already has a bond, that prosecutor decided now is the time for what? My closing argument? Because that's what I heard, a closing argument from a prosecutor laying out everything. Now, Don, you and I have had many cases. The first case we met was a prosecutor with a press conference that brought out facts that turned out not to be true. I and he had a financial relationship. All I'm suggesting is for today is I didn't understand the reason for the closing argument already by a prosecutor, because that is that's a 2019 perp walk before the court of public opinion, before we ever have any evidence, any discovery whatsoever. Let us wait, let the process work the way it's supposed to work, and let not only Smollett but every other person accused enjoy the benefits that we're supposed to give them. And that presumption of innocence was in fact destroyed.
Correct me if I'm wrong, didn't the superintendent say he sent the letter? He believes he sent the letter to himself?
Well, that's their presumption. Yeah, right. They have now decided that Smollett is absolutely guilty, and everything he did was a setup from day one. All I'm suggesting is, here's what I didn't hear. I did not hear a result from the FBI saying it was his own saliva on the envelope or something.
Got it.
So let me throw out two other things that then I know Ariva wants to talk in. What was the purpose of bringing out that this person may have sold him recreational drugs in the past? What relevance does that have? I'd just like to know why they decided to throw that into the mix today. If not, to try and sway public opinion against a person. Now, again, if he did it, he should be held responsible for it, and he's really hurt the civil rights movement by being greedy and selfish. Great. We are just way far away from that today.
So I want your take now, Reva, because his legal team says their client was betrayed by a system and that there are political motivations with an election coming soon. Do they have a point?
I don't think they have a point about the mayoral election. He's brought on Mark Garagos. Mark is our friend. We know Mark is a great lawyer. I think Mark was brought on to help Jussie Smolet stay out of jail. I agree with Mark O'Mara to an extent in terms of the prosecutors probably overreached in terms of reading and providing information that wasn't necessary at this stage. We had already had this powerful press conference from the chief of police. He had already told us pretty much the questions I think that the public had, which is why would Jussie Smolet, who seemingly was so successful, why would he do this? He answered that question about him not being satisfied with his salary. So I don't think we needed to hear that information from the prosecuting attorney. But here's the deal. Jussie went on Good Morning America. He brought his case into the court of public opinion. So he made the decision to do that, and now the police department is responding in kind. This case did not have to be litigated in the court of public opinion, but Jussie did that, and once you step into this arena, all bets are off. So I think Mark makes a good point, but there are many people in our community that wanted to know, why did he do this? High-profile people in the social justice community put their reputations, their credibility on the line, and I think they deserve to have some answers. And I know, and we all know, because there are legal proceedings that are happening, Jussie cannot speak out. He can't make a statement. He has to allow this process to play itself out. But I think people feel so betrayed. They want to hear from somebody, and they don't want to hear about this being about the mayoral election. They want to hear, did he do this? And if he did, why did he do it? And if he didn't do it, we want to hear that he didn't do it, not that somebody is pursuing some political agenda.
We want to, everyone wants to hear from him, right? And they want to hear his side of the story. Reva, you made my point last night when I talked about the court of public opinion. He's lost in the court of public opinion. And doing the interview, you made a very good point. It did not have to play out this way. That's why I wondered who was advising him to even do that interview, but because by doing that, he brings it upon himself that now the other side can use that interview and also bring things out in a manner that may not have been done if he hadn't done it. Thank you so much. I appreciate both of you. The mayor of Chicago weighs in on Jussie Smolet, the mayor of Chicago, and the impact of his allegations that they've had on the city. Rahm Emanuel is here next. Don't go away. Police and prosecutors in Chicago. Joining me now is Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Mayor Emanuel, I appreciate you joining us. I want to play the Superintendent Eddie Johnson today, and then we'll discuss. Here it is.
This stunt was orchestrated by Smolet because he was dissatisfied with his salary. So he concocted a story about being attacked. Now, our city has problems. We know that. We have problems that have affected people from all walks of life, and we know that. But to put the national spotlight on Chicago for something that is both egregious and untrue is simply shameful.
So, Mayor, the superintendent was clearly disgusted and emotional talking about this alleged hoax. How did you feel watching him talk about Chicago?
Well, he's exactly right. And the Chicago I know, as I said earlier today, across our city in 77 different neighborhoods, there are people that have signs in their front lawn, on their windows, that say hate has no home here. And to use Chicago in that way is not true to who we are as a city. Whether because of sexual orientation, race, faith, we have 140 languages spoken in our public schools. We are a welcoming city of all types of people. And I'm upset about what he said about the city and the way he used the city. But more importantly, and every city has challenges to work on, let me say something about our city. That is, our police officers took this as a very serious hate crime, and they dedicated the resources to deal with it as a hate crime. But then you literally put doubt, not only about the city, but more, and also, in addition, what about the person that's in the workplace facing discrimination and racial discrimination?
Right.
What about the young man who is dealing with his own sexual orientation and is attacked for it in high school or in some school, who's now going to doubt whether people are going to believe him? You have put all those real stories at risk for your fake story. That is not right. That is not right for Chicago. That is not right for what kind of city we are, because I know the city. I'm going to tell you an example of it. About 3 months ago, we were talking about our free community college program, and the young man at a breakfast that introduced me is the son of a Syrian immigrant who fled the violence of Syria to introduce a Jewish mayor who's the grandson of an individual that came to Chicago fleeing the violence of Eastern Europe 100 years ago. And no other city can you have an immigrant child who's now going to college because of the same aspirations, introduce, of a different faith, a Muslim, introduce a Jewish mayor who's a grandson of an immigrant. That is the city I know. That is the city that actually loves people because they love the city, they care in our common humanity. And he put that all at risk for himself.
Mayor.
He put the idea of somebody facing, yes?
I don't normally see you get this emotional. Why is that?
Well, you haven't, because it's, look, I was, my mother started her career and started us in politics, working on Congress on racial equality in Chicago. I'm the son and the grandson of an immigrant. I saw when Pittsburgh had a synagogue and people died, people of all faiths in my city came together. Muslim, Christian, and Jew, because an attack on one faith is an attack on all faith and all people of all faith. That is the Chicago I know. And if you want to get paid more, get an agent. But don't use your sexual orientation, don't use your race, and have everybody's sympathies come to you, and it turns out none of that was true. And some young man in school is going to be attacked. Somebody at work is going to face discrimination. And everybody now is going to have two doubts about whether that is true.
You mentioned the police department. And I just want to go through what the superintendent and others laid out in painstaking detail. The police work that went into piecing together everything that happened. Listen to this and then we'll discuss.
We interviewed over 100 individuals in a canvass of the area and a follow-up canvass as our investigation expanded.
Defendant Smolet further detailed that he wanted Abel to attack him, but not hurt him too badly, and to give him a chance to appear to fight back. Defendant Smolet also included that he wanted Ola to place a rope around his neck, pour gasoline on him, and yell, "This is MAGA country."
I believe that Mr. Smolet wanted it on camera, but unfortunately that particular camera wasn't pointing in that direction.
The stage attack lasted 45 seconds, and it was just outside the view of the desired nearby camera that Smolet had pointed out to the brothers approximately 15 hours earlier.
We have the check that he used to pay them. So the $3,500 was for the two of them in total, and then $500 upon return.
Mayor, there's no mistaking it. They did an amazing job. I don't think Smolet, and I wonder how you feel about this, if he knew what he was up against, if he knew, and I know, I work there. Chicago is one of the most surveilled cities in the nation, really started the trend with the cams all over the city and so on. They did an amazing job. Did he know what he was up against?
That's a question you got to ask him and his attorneys. But our police department and all the businesses did a fabulous job. They worked tirelessly to get to the bottom and get the facts that happened here. And what he knows or didn't know, that's something only he can answer. I do want to do one other thing. I'm proud of the police department, I'm proud of the city. I also know the true character of the city. And what he said happened is not the character of our city or the people that make it up. Now that said, we have our problems. We're going to work on solving them. I would just say one other cautionary note, Don. I think the national media, I think national politicians, they need to take a step back. And they need to think about this moment, they need to think about other moments, and think about how we approach stories going forward. Because you and I know that the moment this was said, everybody rushed to judgment about the veracity of it. And it didn't add up to a lot of us that live in Chicago. Our officers pursued it as if it was the truth and came to the truth or the facts as they were laid out. I hope one of the things that we all come out of this is learning that before we rush to judgment, we should take a pause, get the facts. And that's not just on the media, although that's a part of it. That's also on national politicians. They jump to a conclusion about what was true and not true at the time, which is also why I'm upset. Because at some point, somebody in the future who is a victim of an attack because of their sexual orientation, or a victim because of their attack because of their faith, or a victim because of their race, will not be believed, but when they should be heard and trusted for what has happened to them. And this puts that at risk. Yeah. And that, to me, is what is also upsetting.
Here, this is what the president tweeted about this. He said, Jussie Smollett, what about MAGA and the tens of millions of people you insulted with your racist and dangerous comments? And then he did a hashtag MAGA. Listen, you talked about national politicians. He is the biggest national politician, the leader of the free world, really. The country is incredibly divided right now. We're debating blackface scandals, protests by black football players, Nazis marching in Charlottesville. Emotions are really raw right now. Was he taking advantage, Jussie Smollett, meaning of the divides in our society, making matters worse?
Well, let me say one thing about President Trump. You know, for all of us who are battling bigotry, its consequences, this is also a president that draws moral equivalency of what happened in Virginia between bigots and those fighting bigotry. And there is not the same moral equivalency. So when it comes to having a lecture, I just like to remind the president of what he said when things were happening in Virginia, which really drew a moral equivalency, and there isn't. There's a real difference because those who advocate and promote bigotry and those who confront it head on.
So before I let you go, what's your message to the people of Chicago right now? You said you'd have to bite your tongue when it comes to Jussie Smollett. What do you say to the citizens of Chicago?
Well, first of all, a lot of people through this last 3 weeks in Chicago, they said this didn't add up. The facts that they know it, literally in the middle of the night at 2:30 in the morning on Lower Wacker, somebody going out at 2:30 in the morning when it's basically almost the Arctic freeze. You could have done Uber foods if you wanted. That you're going to go there, they're waiting for you, and you did this in the middle of downtown. None of that made sense. But in the bigger thing, and Don, if you were in Chicago, you would see what I see when I drive all over the city. Literally in windows of all walks of life in 77 different neighborhoods, on front lawns. Hate has no home. That's the character of the people of the city of Chicago. That is who we are. We have our challenges, but we work together to solve them and address them.
Mayor Emanuel, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Don.
If Jussie Smollett did make all of this up as police allege, the big question everyone wants answered is, why? We'll try to figure that out next. Okay, so here we go. Tonight, a statement on behalf of Jussie Smollett calling his arrest and court appearance a spectacle that trampled on Smollett's presumption of innocence. And I want to talk about this case now with John McWhorters, a professor of linguistics at Columbia University. He's the author of Words on the Move. And I thank you for joining us. I read your article on this, and this is before you saw everything. Right, that was laid out.
This is 5 days ago.
Thank you so much for joining us, by the way. It's called What the Jussie Smollett Story Reveals. It shows a peculiar aspect of 21st century America. You call it victimhood chic. What do you mean?
Well, what I mean by that is that, in a way, this isn't surprising what he did. And so, as culpable as he seems to be, and I'm using seems only being very polite, as culpable, I'm going to say it as he is. It's clear. Still, he didn't get this out of nowhere. This is a young man who figured out that he could be more interesting as somebody who was jumped by MAGA shouting white guys than he is as the very deft star of a really interesting TV show. And so what this means is that, in a way, all of us are culpable in that, if we are part of this us, we look at, say, the Covington kid, and we look at 1 millisecond of his smile, and we decide that he symbolizes the racism of all of America, when really it was just a millisecond of that kid walking by somebody and not smiling with his teeth showing. And intelligent people think of themselves as being ahead of the curve and seeing that as a summation of American social history. Now, somebody like Jussie Smollett looks at that zeitgeist, not that specific thing, because that's a little late, but there are all sorts of examples of this over about the past 15 years. And he realizes that if he's somebody who is slightly vainglorious, and many of us are, and he also happens to be black, as many of us are, he thinks that I could be really famous. I could be more important than I am being on this hit TV show doing a really deft performance as a very interesting character that intersects in an interesting way with the person who I am. I could be even more important if I stage this attack. And you can imagine what he was thinking. And I know I'm getting a little bit creative, but you can imagine what he was thinking. He's been attacked. He becomes Jussie Christ, basically. And so he writes a book with somebody. Then he gets to do the audio of the book, and in between the chapters of the book, he would have songs that he wrote, that he recorded. That audio book would become a big hit, and then he would get a talk show, and he would become Jussie Oprah. That's the sort of thing that he was waiting for, because he knows that here in America, not only do we know that racism and homophobia exist, and we should, but he knows that we've gotten to the point that we are so bent on demonizing people like that Covington kid, demonizing somebody who voted for Donald Trump because they didn't prioritize racism as much as some of us do, that he actually thought that it would be a good idea to create something like this and become more famous than he was. And the sad thing is that if it had worked, he's right. He would have that talk show. He would be Jussie Christ.
So he apparently met with, the reporting is that he met with the Empire cast and crew tonight. And here is, I think in the third paragraph where it says, after a lot of hugs and kisses of tender friendship, Jussie then expressed a personal message to everybody as a group. First, he apologized for any embarrassment they might have felt since the story began. Then, to the shock and dismay of the person who attended the meeting, Jussie defiantly stuck to his story of innocence and, for the most part, paraphrased in his own words what was in the statement that his attorneys put out this afternoon, blaming the legal system and the media for his woes.
Oh, the humanity. We have to imagine what's in his head. There are very few evil people, and so we have to imagine how he is going to sleep at night. And where he gets this, you know, he's going to basically go to his grave, rolling his eyes and sprinkling half sentences all over the place when this comes up, implying that there's something that we've all missed. Where he's getting this is the idea that there's this larger narrative that we're supposed to keep in mind, even in the place of facts. And so, Mike Brown, it's tragic that he died, but there is still an idea that Mike Brown died with his hands up. Now, the facts have made it quite plain that that's not what happened. There is, nothing beyond any shadow of a doubt that that's not how that boy died. But there's a certain sense that we're supposed to believe it on some larger level. I've heard ordinary people talking about it. I've certainly read esteemed intellectuals writing about it as if that somehow happened. Jussie Smollett has grown up in that kind of environment where he watches the facts being skirted in that way, where, say, a Rachel Dolezal, who's a white woman who walks around spray tan pretending that she's black, never says, okay, it was all just a big hoax, and now I'm going to be white because that's who I am. But she kind of smirks to the cameras and kind of walks off into the sunset. Jussie Smollett has come of age within that. So as far as he's concerned, his relationship to these facts is about as oblique as those of a certain person with a certain amount of authority who you and I usually talk about. It's the same thing. He drinks it in from the zeitgeist. Now, I'm not saying that it's okay. He is clearly an extreme personality with a certain extreme self-regard, which you can smell from his Twitter feed, from interviews. It's funny, I read an interview with him about 3 years ago where I had the guiltiest feeling. Now, I'm not talking about the hoax that has come out over the past few weeks. 3 years ago, I read a very nice interview with him where I thought, And I hated myself for thinking it because I couldn't think of anything that was wrong with him. I thought, there's something smug about him. It's like he wants to be a civil rights hero of the past, and he's a little uncomfortable that circumstances today don't quite allow it. I swear I thought that, and I would never have written it, and I just went on with my life, but I thought there's something about that guy, and look how there is. That's what turned out to happen.
Listen, I am over, but I just have to ask you this. What does it mean, race issues as a whole in this country, when someone, as you say, and this is a quote from your article, can be acting oppression rather than suffering it? If you quick answer.
It's the funniest thing. You know that things have gotten better when somebody can actually feel comfortable pretending to be oppressed rather than really being oppressed. When people were really suffering, you've got the hoses in Birmingham, you've got people lying. Nobody was going to act. That was very rare. Once things get better, you can start turning it into some sort of drama as if we were on Empire. And so that means that as tragic and pathetic as what Jussie Smollett, quote unquote, allegedly did, as disgusting as it is, it's a sign that we've come further than we often like to admit. Because if things were really as bad as we're often told, and that's not to say that there is no racism and there's no homophobia, if it really was 1960 except the window dressing had changed, there could not be a Rachel Dolezal, and there could never be a serious-minded, intelligent, brilliant performing person like Jussie Smollett who pulls something like this and comes out of it thinking that he's been wronged. We're doing better than we think.
John McWhorter, thank you very much.
Thank you, Don.
We'll be right back.